you know, you know, transcendental proof that there must be space in order to receive that sound or
That's
something
right.
like that.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So I think
That.
Kant was probably mistaken about that. I think he was right that
Hmm.
time is a necessary condition for the possibility of experience, but I'm
Right,
not
but
sure
not the
that
spaces.
spatiality is. I don't see why it would have
I
to
don't
be.
understand like why that's not another category though.
I don't understand.
Category in what sense? Wait.
Well, I mean, not a category, but like connected to the category of time space. Because I mean, isn't sound just like I gotta think about this.
Like, because all we have to go on to make that proof is the sound as it is in experience, right? So we're not making any assumptions about sound as transverse waves and so forth. Um,
Right, exactly.
I mean, you might be able to argue that to be an experiencer requires you, or to have experiences of sound. I mean, no matter what it is that produces them, requires you to be. If okay, either requires you to be a spatially extended thing, or requires uh, there to be some spatially extended thing in order for you to have that experience, or something
Yeah,
like that.
all right.
I don't know how easy that argument would be.
I'm skeptical that there's a successful argument like that. But I'll tell you an interesting sort of codicil to this, which is I don't actually think visual experience requires spatiality.
Right. I think you could make just the same kind of point.
Yeah,
Right?
as long as there's no
What?
differentiations within the visual field, there's merely temporal differentiations, right? So you have like a pure experience of redness followed by a pure experience of blueness in time,
Yeah, because
right?
it's not clear to me what in our constant, in our notion of the visual field requires there to actually be differentiation. I mean,
Right, exactly.
well, there's differences in it, right? But it's not clear that those differences are spatial differences, or at
They
least
don't
in
But
have
terms of
to
doesn't
visual
be.
he?
truth.
Yeah.
Right.
But but doesn't he use that very fact to conclude those to get to those conclusions like Euclidean geometry, which is like geometry requires us to see things visually and geometrical
Well, I mean, the thing about
distinguishable from.
geometry is, right, is that it can be described abstractly in algebraic terms, right, without.
Right.
So it seems like you don't actually need geometry a um, unless you have spatialized experience. But if your experience is not spatialized, right,
You're saying we don't
whatever.
need it in the sense that there's no application for it or something like that, but we could still
But I mean,
think of it
Well,
and
you
still
could still
abstract it,
have
is
you
what you're
could
saying.
still have all the relations, right, in
Right.
mathematical terms without actually being able to
Being able to
conceive.
express it in some
Yeah, in
other
some
way.
spatialized form, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
We're
but
seeing
I mean, just because Descartes was able to merge geometry and algebra, I don't necessarily think that means that we could just see things algebraic, right?
Well, I,
Like it
I
doesn't
wasn't talking
follow.
about seeing. I was just saying conceptualized.
Right.
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 What if we looked at it as if we're actually seeing change? We can't like if we're
What
seeing
difference does that make to what Jack said?
What does it mean to say? What does it mean to see change? I mean, I guess it's not really relevant anyway.
like there could be seeing instances in time and or we could be actually seeing change to energy. Um,
Let's get secular in here to debate.
I'll,
so like
actually, I'll ping him.
so we're seeing a change in the version of mass.
But Jack, this is actually really interesting. I'm going to go back real quick about what you said about sound. Is that the reason why Schopenhauer thought that music was the expression of the will? Like all other art was just a representation of the will, whereas music was the will itself, because like it doesn't require what you just mentioned. Is that how he? Because I
It
never
seemed
figured.
like he thought. It seemed like he thought that music was abstract in a way that, whereas all other art forms were representational.
Right.
But if he had seen, let's say, abstract painting, right? I'm not sure why he would have been able to privilege music in that way. It seemed like it was an argument derived from like the existing arts that he was acquainted with, rather than some kind of like conceptual argument about what kind of possible art forms there could be.
No, but I'm saying like what you said was interesting about hearing sound without needing time and space, right? As that as like intuitions.
Yeah,
You're
but
saying like
actually
that
my argument doesn't depend on sound. You could make the same argument about visual field. I think it's just sort of easier
or even smell or
to
hear.
approach it through the example of sound.
So the argument you're trying to make for the example of sound is that you don't think that sound is like a necessary requirement for space, essentially. And the argument for
I'm
medicine
saying that I don't think space is a necessary precondition for
for
experience.
experience. That's right, for experience.
Well, that's or at least that we can't prove it with some sort of transcendental argument like this, because it may actually be necessary if it might just be necessary that all experiences are extended or require things that are extended
Well,
in space to
I
have those
look, let me
experiences.
just clarify
couldn't-
one point. Right. I do think that a body is required for experience. But I don't think a body
Right.
I don't see an argument that a body has to be construed spatially.
Right.
Which I realize sounds very odd.
Because it becomes tricky,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
It sounds very odd, right? But I think we can give an account of what a body is that would distinguish it from a mind, and such that
but what sort of account could you give of a body that's compatible with not being extended in space?
well,
I mean, I'm not saying that we can't do
yeah,
that, but it just
it's
seems
counterintuitive, right?
strange.
But the idea would be what a body does is, first of all, um, it has there's some kind of causal dependency relation, right, between bodies and minds, such that you can't have minds unless there are bodies, right? Now, I take it that what a body is a physical, is a some kind of physical entity, right? And minds are non-physical. And what I take, well, I mean, you know, this is, I mean, I don't, I'm, it, the argument that I'm making sort of presupposes that.
Yeah, fine.
But yeah, so when I say that something's physical, I take it that that means that it's describable in terms of laws, right? Whereas there aren't actually like mental and psychophysical laws, right, on this view. And so I'm
Yeah.
not sure that laws presuppose spatiality, right, for one thing. Now, also, I take it that the body is a medium which furnishes the mind with content, right, on an externalist view, right?
Okay.
But what that means then is that some things in the world that exist, right, given one's sort of, I'm going to use the word orientation, but that's like a metaphor because I'm not construing it spatially necessarily, right? given one's orientation, right, it's going to make some of those physical and non-physical facts that are external to one, right, salient, right? Whereas if you're oriented a different way, other ones will be salient, right?
Okay.
And so, right, so we hear sounds, let's say. Let's say we're talking about experience that's partially um, uh, auditory, right? So it's not going to be that different from our common sense picture, right? In that there's an object external to you which makes a noise, right? And
produces stimuli
yeah,
some
right. And there's
way.
a causal relation. Now, I'm not sure that that causal relation has to be construed in spatial terms the way that we do, where we say, you know, the sound of the uh, lightning strike propagates through the air across, you know,
Some medium, whatever. Yeah.
5 miles of air and hits your eardrum, right? As long as you have this kind of like causal relation, I'm not sure you actually need, I'm not sure you need the space there to have sort of a coherent picture of an experiencing subject, differentiated from a world that impinges on his sensorium, right?
I guess I have a whole bunch of questions here. Um, Going back to something you said earlier, where, in some sense, speaking loosely, the orientation makes some sort of difference in sort of what sort of experience you have. What can you? Do you have any more idea what that means exactly? I mean, was I
I guess I'd
understanding that
have to
correctly?
think about how to talk about that.
Like there must be some sort of relation, like some sort of, non-physical relations that you can have, or something like that, or I
Well,
don't know, wave.
non-spatial.
Sure, I don't know. Okay, well, but non-spatial may just mean
But yeah, I
non-physical
guess you're making an
if the
interesting
physical
point, right? Which
is
is, let's
sound.
say there's more than one subject, right?
Right.
How is it that now obviously we can individuate them on the basis of them having different experiences,
Mm-hmm.
but if we're positing that they have different bodies, right, which accounts for how they have different experiences,
Or at
right?
least in part
Because,
counts for it.
or at
Yeah.
least partly, yeah. Because
Right.
I'm not an internalist, so I'm not a content internalist. So some of the
Right.
mental content has to be derived through the sensorium, right? I mean, some of it will be derived from previously sensed content, um, but it can't all be that on the view, right? So I guess there's a question as to what individuates the bodies, if not spatially, and maybe
Yeah, and
that's a way that you could argue that there does have to be space.
I was trying to think, even just taking one body, if uh, consider it this way, I think it's probably reasonable to say that a body is that can satisfy this sort of requirement for uh, leading to sort of individuating experiences and whatnot. That body's not going to be some sort of simple, right? It's going to be has to be at least some composite, I think, right? I mean,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and if it's a composite, well, I mean, perhaps it can be composed of non-spatial parts, but I don't know. That just seems kind of mysterious to me. What is in what? How do you compose something of?
But is that something that's unknown to physics? Because aren't there putatively non-spatial physical facts?
Well, physical. Uh, yeah, perhaps. I think There are, on some models, true ways to describe the world that don't, I mean, at least directly describe spatial fact.
Like, for instance, non-spatially extended entities, right? Like, I don't know, maybe there are.
Oh, like point particles or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Wait, give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
Just point particles is like a loop.